Hi, my name is Adrian and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Community Software. Today we're going to talk about project risk management. Risk management is very important to a project because it can reduce stress and reduce complexities and challenges to a project, or it can actually cause a project to fail if risk management is not done properly. So we'll talk about risk management, we'll talk about the top risks in a project, we'll discuss the risk and its properties, how to capture a risk, we'll talk about the risk register, and then ongoing risk management and where the future of risk management is going. And then we'll talk about risk management within Camellia, and then we'll reference a tutorial of risk management within the Camellia.com product, the Camellia project management system. So the beginning of risk awareness, there isn't really it's not well documented, but the assumption is that it started with gambling. People that were preoccupied with gambling, that were involved in gambling, they started to assess risks. And that's where one of the first recorded histories was around gambling. The other thing, in the Roman times, risk management started to creep into the more commercial world around burial services. Back then it was called burial services, but basically it was life insurance. There were two individuals, Pascal and Fermat, both they lived in 1654, and they were writing letters between themselves. I don't know if it was more of a curiosity or something, just some thoughts being shared between two friends, but those letters became the first written record of someone applying depth to risk management and the laws of probability. Risk management in today's world is a lot more serious. It's taken a lot more seriously. We do have standards, risk management standards, both from NIST, PMI, and ISO, especially ISO 31000. It's taken very serious at various levels of management, various layers of management, especially in the defense industry. Risk management is taken very seriously. There's degrees and certifications offered by various institutes and organizations, and there's risk management being implemented at various levels and in various forms across every domain, be it at a business level, at a program level, and obviously at a project management level. I am a huge proponent of risk management because that is when you really understand what is my risk exposure to the project. So the top risk for businesses and projects as far as risks management is concerned is strategic risk, compliance risk, operational risk, financial risk, and reputational risk. One of the key risk groups that is coming to the fore is reputational risk, because we're seeing a lot of companies that are really watching the brand, the corporate brand, and we're seeing, as especially in the cybersecurity world and the technology world, an impact such as an attack or a breach can really cause the brand, can really affect the brand of the company. So now upper level management echelon is starting to take a look at the risk management and really give it prominence and seriousness. But the other risk groups are very important, especially strategic risk, because if the project doesn't fit within the corporate and the business model, it can introduce a lot of difficulties to the project. For projects, risk management normally starts, the main risk gets introduced in scope management. If there isn't good scope management for a project, that is one of the biggest reasons projects fail, is because the scope management risk is not taken seriously, it's not managed properly, and it doesn't have good controls around that. Cost and budget risks are the second bracket of risks for a project. And then scheduling milestones. When you start seeing projects miss milestones, that's when you know something is amiss with this project. So that's why that bracket of risks is very important. The other one is sponsor and executive support. If the project doesn't have the sponsorship and the support, if there isn't a champion, project champion out there for the project, then that becomes a problem for the project itself. That's a risk to the project itself. And then again, the acceptance, production acceptance risk, making sure that as the project transitions into production, into operations, that those risks are addressed as well. There are various risk properties. There's many systems out there that manage risks. I believe that Camellia manages risks very well, and Camellia is posed to manage risks in the future even better. Camellia is actually going to be one of the first products out on the market that will provide a high level of intelligence, business intelligence to risk management. So stay tuned on that. But the basic things that most systems out there capture around risk properties, it's the name and description of the risk, obviously, the category of the risk owner. That's very important. When a risk it doesn't have ownership, then it just goes into a black hole, so to speak. And then the risk type, that's very important. Probability versus impact score. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then the review schedule, making sure that risks, especially high impact risks, that they're reviewed regularly and that they stay in the front center as far as the project team is concerned. And then the mitigation strategy. What happens if a risk does actualize? How do we? What are we going to do when that risk actually happens? What do we do? What's the mitigation strategy for that? Those are some screens as far as what Camellia does, around the properties that Camellia captures around risk management. Risk identification, capture, and tracking. Risk management is led by the project manager. Larger projects do have a risk manager, and organizations, we're starting to see CROs, Chief Risks Officer, a person that just focuses on the organization's risk. You see CROs and risk managers positions in finance and healthcare, because healthcare deals with HIPAA and other sensitive data. Various large projects, especially around defense, in the defense industry, military, you see that they implement a risk manager role within projects and within organizations. So the risk management is one of the most important aspects to a project. Having a good risk management processes and methodology in place, it's very key, especially to larger, high budget projects. Risk elicitation, this is very important. I've seen projects fail because they did not do risk elicitation properly. They didn't bring everybody to the board. In the past, it was a select team, a group of minds, so to speak, that did risk elicitation, risk assessment, and they didn't bring everybody, and that was a failure. That was a fault because it introduced the risk of failure into the project. So on my projects, from the very beginning, I was a champion of risk management. So I brought everybody to the table, and then all of a sudden, risks were discussed that would not have been discussed had a certain skill set or a certain profession was not brought to the table to discuss that, such as software development or other types of professions. The line of ownership, as far as risk is concerned, again, a risk without an owner just goes into a black hole. Camellia provides that line of ownership within risk management, within the Camellia project management system. Constant risk reviews, again, that needs to happen. Risk awareness throughout the project. One thing that in the past did not happen was constant risk assessment. So there was a risk assessment done at the beginning of the project, but then it wasn't done at various phases. I do risk assessments on a regular basis. So part of my risk reviews is a small part of risk assessment. Are there any new risks? Are we seeing something on the horizon as a project team that we should be aware of? Because there's always changes, external changes, political changes, compliance changes, all the types of changes, both within the organization or outside of the organization, outside the project. And then internally within the project, there's personnel change, there's occasionally scope change. When a scope change request comes in, I always immediately jump and say, okay, what is the budget for that scope change, and then what is the risk that the scope change introduces? So we take a look at the whole risk map again and identify if any new risks have been introduced for that scope change. Risk awareness throughout the project, so risk identification and reviews, risk inclusion and project closure processes, the lessons learned process. A lot of times lessons learned doesn't talk about risks. So risks that were identified before, projects run into those risks again, and those risks actualize, and there's this, people hear about it, and then there's this thing, well, didn't that other project have the same risk? Why didn't you think about that? Well, because that knowledge has been lost, because in that project's lessons learned process, risk reviews and risk capture was not done. So that should be done for every project as the project closes. Capture those risks, identify those risks in a nice systemic way, so that way that knowledge is not lost. And then risk management transfer to operations. A lot of times this is not done, so the product or the service gets transitioned over to operation, and boom, the risk doesn't, the operations team is not made aware that this risks or set of risks is also coming along, and they're not aware of it, they're not taking it seriously, and something happens, and then there's frustration and stress and all sorts of negative stuff that happens inside the company. Risk register, this is very important again because of that systemic way of capturing the risk. There's a lot of compliance regulations and compliance that are coming and that are coming, and that's only going to grow in the future as risk management becomes more prominent, because these compliance bodies, everybody's focused on reducing risk across various systems and various business models and workflows. So we're going to see that, you see a lot of that in the credit card industry, because they want to reduce risk at the credit card industry level. There's a lot of risk in cybersecurity again, and a lot of in healthcare. There's a lot of risk management and compliance that is being taken in consideration. The risk management maturity again, it's growing, and the register is one way that we see that, because people are now taking a look at the register, and the register almost becomes outside of a project. Yes, a project feeds into the risk register, and certain risks are only applicable to projects, but the register itself is starting to be an entity in itself that survives and exists outside of projects. So that's really cool, in my opinion. The risk register also provides mapping, that higher level of intelligence where you have risk heat maps, and then you get to see, okay, this is where my risk is, or this is where most of my risks come from or resides, and various activities can trigger a risk. So that's becoming more visible. Business intelligence and risks, again, that is the ongoing awareness that needs to happen, and as applications such as Camellia get smarter, we're seeing risk awareness and risk mitigation get a lot smarter, a lot better, and reduces the overall risk, not just to the project, but also to the organization and company itself. That is a high-level risk management overview. we're going to transition into, there's another video, how Camellia manages risks for a project, because Camellia does capture a bunch of risk information. Some information is mandatory, some information is optional, but Camellia does offer that, and then obviously the risk report and the risk register. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.